Welcome to Business Leader Breakthroughs, where we help unlock the potential in you, your teams, and your business. I'm your host, Ryan Castle, along with Dr. Mike Ashby. We share insights, experiences, and stories on achieving breakthrough success in business and life. In addition to a podcast, The Breakthrough is a coaching and advisory business that provides programs for business leaders, owners, and managers to develop your skills and capabilities to boost your business and enjoy a better life. To learn more, click the link in the episode show notes or go to thebreakthrough.co. Now let the breakthroughs begin.
Mike, welcome along to this episode of Business Leader Breakthroughs. Great to have you back on the show.
It's great to be back, Ryan. It feels like it's been a while. You've been talking to other people, haven't you?
I have. It's lucky we've got an open podcast relationship.
It is just as well.
Let's not start this off as a difficult conversation, because we are in fact here today to talk about difficult conversations.
Difficult conversations, not have one.
Yes. Well, we'll see how it rolls. We might end up there, but definitely the topic of difficult conversations. Yeah. And we have now worked with hundreds of organizations and the thousands of managers in those organizations. Of all the skills those organizations would like their managers to have, and there are numerous, but the one that most commonly comes up is, how can you help my managers be better at difficult conversations?
Yeah. And I don't think it's just managers. We've got a senior leader program, high performance leadership program, and I was working with a group of execs. And in the course of some of the content, I said, having these challenging conversations with underperformers in your organization, you either train, transfer, or terminate. And boy, did we go down a whole thing. And I should have known, because exactly as you say, every organization, every owner or leader you talk to, you start the conversation about how do we deal with underperformers who are kind of not bad enough to fire without, not fire on the spot, and they're not bad enough to put them in performance. But how do we deal with them? And that always starts and we just spent the rest of the time talking about that. And then, so that was a month ago. And then when we came back into the program, we were meant to move on to the next piece of content. All we did was talk about the conversations they had. It's a really fundamental piece of management. And it's really hard because look, a difficult conversation is anything that we find hard to talk about because we fear the consequences. And we focus at work, but it's the same throughout our lives. Do we avoid the conversation or do we confront it? It's a bit like that, that hand grenade. You kind of feel like you're pulling the pin out and chucking it in. And once you've pulled the pin out, you can't kind of put it back in. You've got to go through with it. So we all tend to hold off for as long as we can, don't we?
We do, and it's because there's the emotion involved, and the emotion is typically on two sides. It's not only for the person, maybe the manager, who feels like they need to have the difficult conversation, they feel emotional about it, and then the person on the receiving or the other side of the conversation also has their emotional reaction to a difficult conversation. Yeah. And occasionally you get one-sided emotion, and that can be a really bad outcome as well, where you get people that are devoid of empathy, and they go, right, here's my coaching mode, I'm just going to lay it all out. I don't think it's a difficult conversation because I'm just going to tell you how bad you are. Don't feel like that results in very positive outcomes.
No, that's more like a kicking, really, isn't it? An old-fashioned hiding. And it's not how people expect to be treated today, and it's not respectful. And I guess it's important to go back to the purpose of these conversations. There is a time for a straight out lecture, right? There is a time in extreme circumstances where a bawling out is exactly the right response, and there is nothing to say on the other side. Very rare. Mostly what we're trying to do in a difficult conversation is process and resolve an issue, and we're doing it through communication. And that's really important to hold on to that purpose. You're not there to win an argument. You're not there to beat the other person, because it must be that you're already invested in maintaining the relationship. Like, you want to keep this person, or you want to retain a relationship with this person, whether you want to keep them or whether you are happy to see them go. You want to keep a relationship with them. That's different from, look, you can leave tomorrow. You've done so badly, you've behaved so badly or whatever that you can go right now if you want. That's different.
You have breached our values, and breaching our values is not acceptable, and there is a consequence to that. That's not what we're talking about here. That would be a disciplinary meeting. That would be you've breached our values. What we're talking about here is growing someone, going, hey, we're observing some things here that are not going the way they should be. Let's have a conversation about how we have that conversation, and then it's a growth. We're really looking to invest in this person, and part of the investment is confronting the fact that you have to have the difficult conversation, but you bring it with care and respect for the individual because you want them to grow and be better in your organisation.
And you want them to stay. You're prepared to have a conversation about where you try and process and resolve the issue, and the issue might be one of, I kind of in the content we separate out underperformance, which is about capability. So let's confine this one to attitude, and that might affect their performance, but there's an attitude thing or a behavior that is destructive or not constructive or undermining. The conversations we were having yesterday were very much about people who, by their attitudes and demeanors, were undermining the team, and sometimes quite subtly and in quite underhanded sort of fashion. So I guess where you start is in these kinds of conversations is what happened. And that's always interesting because we have our own version of reality. We think we've seen, and all you have to do here is think about a conversation that you've had with a loved one. Your last row, it started with what the other person thought had happened, and it's so different from your version. Well, that's true at work too. We have a bunch of things going on. We have the truth assumption, which is, this is what I saw and I know what's true, so I must be right. And we have what we call the intention invention, which is, this is what you were thinking when you said that. That is always guaranteed to inflame things. You've got it wrong. There's no way you can. So when you're sitting down with the person that you're trying to have this conversation with, and if you hear yourself thinking, they did this because, just remember you're wrong pretty much 99% of the time.
That is a great frame.
Yeah. And if you can you might be right. There's probably more than 1% chance. You might have reason for being more confident, but you don't know. You are inventing that. And then the third one is, who's to blame? Because we love blame.
Is that a scapegoat I see running past?
That's right, a scapegoat. Yeah. And it's called the blame game, isn't it? Because it is a game. Who's to blame here?
So let's overlay those three elements: the truth assumption, the intention invention, and the blame game. You just reminded me of an example. I was working with a client. We were actually doing some active manager training with the group. I was running a collab, and there was an individual in the group who really came to that learning experience with a very closed mindset. And the basis for her closed mindset was, I am so busy. She was a person that arrived at work at 6 a.m. in the morning, worked all day, worked late into the afternoon, wore it like an absolute badge of honor. And because of that perception, and I'm thinking about how I overlay these three and make sure that I don't trip myself up in the overlay, but my perception of her response in that learning experience was, I just come with a closed mindset because I work really hard, I work really long hours, I'm a bit of a martyr in this organization. Right at the time, I was like, a difficult conversation needs to take place here. Probably my assumption was, maybe you're not doing your job as effectively as you could if you think it takes you that long. Mm-hmm. That could have been an assumption.
Another truth assumption would be, you're not contributing as much as you should or could here. You're not contributing as much as you could here. That's your truth.
And what do we feel that person's, what might have their truth assumption been?
Their truth assumption may well have been, I'm trying as hard as I can. How can you say that? I mean, that's a classic what happened, right? It's exactly the same scenario, but we've got totally different versions of it. I'm here, despite everything else, I'm goddamn here. What else do you want? Yeah. I talk.
If we move to the intention invention, what might have I been inventing? I might have been inventing in that moment that her intention was not to participate, and she had no interest in doing so.
And her intention was, by behaving, let's call it badly or negatively, in that her intention was to send a message to everyone else about, look at me, I'm too busy for this. So that may have been her even subconscious intention. That's what we may have thought, right?
Yes.
That's what we invented.
Yes.
That she was just trying to kind of send out the big martyr signal to everybody. Look at me, I'm so hard done by, right?
And then in the blame frame, in that role I had in leading that group, my blame frame might have been because you're coming with that intention, you're wrecking the learning experience for others and you're not making this as, so I'm squarely placing the outcome of this learning experience for everyone at your doorstep.
Yeah. And you're to blame for your own situation. I love the idea of contribution instead of blame. I think it's a really powerful way. You know, we had a big family bust up, without going into all the grisly details. It had been a long time coming, and it was pretty nasty. And I was thinking about, who's to blame? Who's more to blame? And then I realized it's just the wrong way to think about it. Actually, who contributed? Because there were a couple of people who contributed more than anybody else. But there were, 2 or 3 others who contributed quite a lot. And in fact, when I looked at it, we all contributed, including me. And thinking about it in terms of contribution in a workplace setting is who's contributed to that person in the collab? What has contributed to her behavior? Certainly she has, absolutely. Has her manager? Yeah, probably. Somewhere along the line, they've contributed by either not giving them enough resource, failing to stop them doing too much themselves, failing to almost enforce a work-life balance, a more balanced approach, failing to have the difficult conversation early on. They're all contributions to that outcome. And perhaps the people around her also made a contribution by not speaking up. When you look at it like from contribution, it's a wide circle, and that's much more valuable than blame, I think.
So say I was that person's manager and I had identified that this conversation needs to take place. What should I do before I even talk about having that conversation or setting the meeting? How should I think about preparing that for that myself?
Yeah, I think it's really important that you look at what you're bringing. So you look at you start by detaching yourself a little bit from it, and you go into, our active mindset, what's really going on here? And you look at yourself and you realize, you're actually pretty annoyed with her or him for their behavior, what they're doing in the group, and it's kind of ruining the group process. And, this is not the first time, and you're probably carrying quite a lot of stuff about them, quite a lot of feelings, actually. The first thing you got to do is acknowledge how you feel to yourself. And once you've done that, you can take a more detached but still compassionate approach. So I think it starts there, starts with owning your feelings. What advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, similar, I think, acknowledging how I was feeling about it. One little anecdote that always rings true for me, Mike, is something that you taught me years ago when you reflected on a senior leader at a bank. And whenever he had a difficult conversation to have, he always opened the conversation with, "We have a problem."
Yeah.
And the use of the word "we" rather than "you are a problem" or "I've got a bone to pick with you" or something, it initially started there. And then I always try to think about what's the process we're talking about here, what's going on, rather than looking to critique the individual themselves.
Yeah. And look, that's really important too. First off, this is about feelings, right? It's your feelings, it's their feelings. If there were no feelings, it wouldn't be a difficult conversation. It would just be a technical conversation. So in a way, your difficult conversation is about feelings. And a lot of people go, let's just keep this professional. It's only business. They were famous last words. It's not personal, it's just business. Many a dirty deed's been done under that guise. So it starts with your feelings, owning your feelings, and then being open to hearing their feelings. I think that's really important, and it's part of the mindset you go in with. And back to your feeling, anger is actually okay. There are times, as we talked about, when something's gone seriously wrong. Maybe it's, I always remember a great article from years ago, a guy called Bing who wrote, he was on the back page of Fortune magazine. Seriously, I think it's 2006 or something, and I've still got it. It's called The Upside of Anger. Google it because it's really good. And it just talks about how he went from being all kind of relaxed and mild, and people were taking the mickey and they weren't getting the presentation done, and they're just a bit sloppy, and what came in was rubbish. And he just blew like complete kind of volcano, and made various threats and all this kind of stuff. And the workplace went very, very quiet for a very long time. And what landed on his desk at 8 o'clock in the morning was perfect. And he breathed. There are times when anger is appropriate, not in the context, and certainly not aggression.
Yes.
And you've got
about making that anger personal.
And it's absolutely about keeping it to the behavior, not the person. You can criticize behavior, and that's reasonably objective. But criticizing the person who is probably trying their best, it just takes you into a space that you're not going to get out of nicely. So always about the behavior. And when you start the conversation, getting to their feelings. What was going on for them? How did they feel about that? Invite people to share.
And people are always more willing to hear constructive feedback if they also feel like they are being heard. Difficult conversations should never be one way. Yeah. They are not a lecture. They are a conversation for a reason.
It's a process, process and resolve an issue. The number of times difficult conversations have pretty much ended once somebody has talked about how they felt about a situation and literally got it off their chest and feel that I've heard them. Then we can move on to the resolution. But you can't move on to the resolution until you've done the process. And part of the processing is getting the feelings out on the table, and people need to feel safe with that.
Now, in our Active Manager program, when we teach people the skill of difficult conversations, we usually have a cheat sheet, and that really helps them to prepare in advance for the conversation. We won't go through that in detail in this podcast, but what are some of the things that people should be giving consideration to before they arrive? So we've talked about the feelings piece, about that understanding of coming with the active mindset. Yep. About looking at behavior. What else should we be thinking about as we lead into that conversation?
Taking the attitude of learning, not winning.
That's good.
It is good, isn't it? That's good. I think it's, learning, not winning. You are there to...
But I'm always right. Oh, no, hang on
you're
a
still
moment.
right. No, you're still right. Don't worry about that. You will achieve a lot more if you start out seeking to learn rather than to win. And that involves, what do you think happened? How did this situation make you feel? And then, the we have a problem. I think owning that, I love that phrase. I've used it myself. So John Anderson was somebody who used that, and he was an outstanding chief executive. And he would start with, we have a problem. Because if the person's got a problem, I've got a problem. And if the two of us have got a problem, the organization's got a problem. Probably the rest of the team's affected. All of that stuff. It really is we. You're not the problem. The behavior is a problem for all of us. So we share the problem. I think the other thing to do is really be prepared to manage yourself during the conversation. I think this is really important. It's almost certain that you'll get knocked off balance. They will say something that triggers you. Triggers is a very popular word these days. They will say something that sets you off, and you have to be prepared. And, we know what it's like to be knocked off balance. It's that kind of moment of, the adrenaline starts. We're going to fight, flight, or freeze. We're going to do one of those three. And that's the moment that we have to prepare for. We don't know when it's going to happen, but it is going to happen. And in that moment, we have to be prepared to just stop and take that kind of 3 breaths so that we create a little bit of space between the stimulus and the response, between what's happened and our reaction, because that reaction is driven by the old lizard brain, the prehistoric kind of taking care of my species, including me, the survival instinct, right? So 3 breaths, active mindset, and just regain, make a choice about how you respond. I think the other one that I have found really, really important and really empowering too is in these, when we kind of mull over these conversations, when we ruminate about them as we do, often what we're focused on is their reaction and how we seem to them. The fact that they're going to get angry, the fact that they're going to cry, the fact that they're going to yell, the fact that they're going to go all quiet, the fact that they're going to turn it back on me. What we have to do is let go of the idea that we can control their reaction. We can't control their reaction. And if we let go of that idea, then we can focus on looking after ourselves. It's their reaction. It's their history. What this is about for them is all to do with where they've been. And we have nothing to do with that. What's the best thing you can do when people start yelling?
Yell back.
Second one, yell back, calm down. That always works, doesn't it?
Always.
Will you just calm down? Never fails. Yeah. So I think they call that fuel to the fire, don't they?
They do. And I think part of the mindset of coming to these conversations is going, we may not get this resolved, addressed, or talked through in one meeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
As much as we'd like to go, I've got a difficult conversation. I just want to get in, get over and done with.
Yeah.
Actually, my experience has been sometimes if the emotion is getting away, to go, let's go away, think about this both. We can come back tomorrow or a few days' time and discuss it again. Or sometimes we are aware of team members that they are overnight processors. It's how they think about things. They don't like to be requested to process things on the spot.
Yeah.
So being at a table, going, this is an audience, I want to hear from you. Would you like to think about this overnight and we'll talk again tomorrow? It can really de-escalate that emotion and the feeling piece. And that is our role as managers and leaders, is that this is not a once and done thing.
No.
Growing our people.
Yeah, totally. And helping them to resolve, problems that we've got. And this might surprise you given how well you know how much I talk, right? I am an overnight processor. I am definitely a go away and process the emotion piece. I am not fast to express emotions. Oh, I do get a little impatient, don't I? I can get a bit grumpy. Yeah, that's true. But in deeply difficult conversations, no, I've got to go away. I've got to just, literally overnight. And then I can actually I can own the emotion but still be quite calm, but I can talk about my emotions much, much better in a way that creates some understanding around it. There's something my old mentor, Peter Taylor, used to say. We had some horrendously difficult conversations in our role at the company monitoring unit. Big arguments. And he would always say, look, if we can't solve the problem, let's agree a process. And I think that's great wisdom. We don't try and solve the problem now with what we know and what we've got. Let's create a process that we can sign up to and agree that this will, kind of tell us the answer, give us the answer we need. That's all part of holding on to yourself and having tools that you can go to. You're not having to rely on your lizard brain, because you really don't want to rely on your lizard brain. I suppose the other one in the kind of the tools to go to is holding to purpose, which is always what's in the best interest of the business. And that enables you as a manager to stand back from how you feel about this and how your ego is threatened, or you're feeling you're being undermined, or you're feeling too sympathetic, or you're going too soft. Always going back to the best interests of the business helps you make the right decision and hold fast to that. Great example with one of the guys on the program. He had somebody who was on ACC, on workers' compensation, had injured his hand at work and had been off work for a number of months. He wanted to come back. There was genuinely no role for him. He couldn't do light duties. He certainly couldn't resume his role. And it was a really awful conversation to have to say, look, I'm afraid there's just no job here for you. And our guy was a procrastinator to start with. His colleagues used to say he feathered things. He would always kind of fudge things and, take a long time to get to it. So he had to have this difficult, really difficult conversation. And he said that the thing that enabled him to hold fast to it when he was immensely sympathetic to this person's plight was it just doesn't work for the business. It's just not in the best interests of the business. And it's not even good for this guy because we can't give him a decent job to do to get paid. He's a passenger. But the most important thing that he just kept holding to was the best interests of the business. And sometimes that's really, really hard. That's why these conversations are difficult. As it turned out, it was resolved. The process was one where the way through it was, first off, no, you can't work here. And once that was kind of processed and resolved, then they could move to how can we help you find a job that is suitable for where you're at now.
In my business career that I think unfortunately now have to count in decades, not individual years.
It's still a boy, Ryan.
Been party to a number of difficult conversations. Yep. None of them have ever ended badly. Mm-hmm. When I've bought the intention of a balanced conversation, keeping my emotion in check. My overwhelming experience has been the person on the other side of the table has been willing to have a constructive conversation around what's been going on, and there's never been a bad outcome. Has there been emotion involved? Yep, of course there has. Has there been tears on occasion? Yes, there has. But at the end of that individual or multi-stage conversations, I can honestly say I never feel like there's been a bad outcome where I felt either myself or the other person involved was left belittled or in a state of rage or any of those kind of things. And I think that's part of why we look to avoid difficult conversations as we start picturing the worst possible nightmare that might come out of these. When you treat people with care and respect, I've always found that they've been willing to have an open and constructive conversation about it.
I probably have had some that left an aftertaste for the other person or left an aftertaste for me on the other side of it, because that's happened too, of course. But I would say that I think you are particularly good at this. You are particularly good at holding to the purpose and both enabling people to share their emotions and, really importantly, always respectful and always compassionate. And this was the conversation we had with the guys yesterday in this team. They talked about how they had carried out these conversations, and they'd done a really good job with some difficult people and some pretty ambiguous situations. But what really came through was both purpose, holding to the purpose, and treating the people with compassion. Now, compassion, I don't think we hear much about compassion these days. We hear about empathy and things like that, and empathy is a form of it. I think compassion is a wonderful human quality. I think it's part of a more human workplace is that we have compassion for people who find themselves in difficulties, who find themselves on the wrong side of a difficult conversation. And the thing we can do that's most important and that's most compassionate is to be prepared, is to be resolute, but is to stand in their shoes, is to allow our hearts to feel compassion for them. That's a more human workplace.
It is. And Mike, the framework that we have in our Active Manager program just gives you a really great guide on how to do that preparation without having to do the wing it, remember it. Doing some preparation in advance is really, really helpful. And whilst I thank you for your comment around how I handle these situations, it's a skill that I've learnt. I wasn't born being great at this stuff. They are, through our own programs, mentoring from you, things I've observed with other leaders I've worked for and with. They are skills that I have learned, and that's what we'd say to any of our managers: is these are skills that can be learned.
These are skills that can be learned, and it's simple techniques like the one I've used from time to time, or quite often actually, is as I put my hand on the door to go into the room where the meeting's going to happen, I just say to myself, I've got this. So that's a reminder for me to take responsibility for myself and my reactions, and to be less concerned with taking responsibility for controlling how they are, how they're feeling, how they're responding. I have no control over that, but I do have control over myself. And we have lots of tools available, and through, as you say, through the Active Manager program, all about taking responsibility, how we can better take responsibility for ourselves in a difficult conversation.
That's a good wrap, Mike. Thank you for sharing your insights and knowledge on this topic. And you are, of course, the author of our learning content. So this is something you've spent a lot of time not only bringing your personal experience to, but also researching far and wide about what the latest and most effective techniques are in this area. So thanks for sharing that knowledge today. And to our listeners, we hope you have found this of interest, and we'd certainly love to hear back to you via our comments on our podcast page, your own experience of difficult conversations, whether you have been the initiator or the recipient. What have you found has worked well, and what could work better? Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Ryan. A pleasure as always.